Our goal today is to depict and honor a brave hero who risked it all for the good of the world. No, not him. This guy. After conducting some very rigorous and scientific research, I have concluded that you guys really like Lord of the Rings. And I really like paying my mortgage, so here we are. Now, making it like this would be the smart, responsible thing to do, but what if we could also do this? My current flimsy plan is to do this by making a skull, dress that in a layer of skin, cover it all in resin and shine a light through it from below, and pray that that works. Inside every face there is a skull just waiting to be set free. I started off making this skeletal face holder by slapping a bunch of clay onto this baseboard and slowly working my way towards something that looks like a skull, while trying really hard to remember what one of those actually looks like. Since I have to be able to shine a light through it, a decision I'm already starting to regret by the way, I'll need to cast it in a transparent material, meaning I'm going to have to make a mold for it. I'll also need to cast a second skull to both use as a base to sculpt the face meat onto, as well as the positive half of the resulting rigid mold for casting the silicone face skin into. This is already sounding like a lot of work. After beheading this perfectly fine measuring cup, I'll give the remaining neck section a little squeeze to make it more elf skull proportional. Glued down around the skull, it makes for a great container to cast our mold in, but having been let down by my own gluing skills and the treacherous nature of physics in the past, I opted to also add a little clay safety wall, just in case the silicone tries to make a run for it. Now, it would have been easiest to add some keys or guiding structure to the model before encasing it in cup plastic, but since I didn't, I'll add a couple now, the poor execution of which will come back to haunt me several times over the course of the project. I'm using a 2-part platinum silicone for the mold. After first wondering why people who design packaging hate me personally, I'll mix the two goops into this sticky, delicious looking blue mess I've been told I'm not allowed to eat, and start pouring it into the mold. As I've spent too much money on original SNES cartridges and can't afford a vacuum chamber, I'll have to resort to turtle jazz fingers to make at least some of the air bubbles rise up before leaving it overnight until it's fully cured. But I mean, just look at these beautiful little fellas. All our best friends are here. We've got Mario and Secret of Mana guy, Lonk, Street Punch. So no, I don't have a problem. You have a problem. Shut up.
The next morning.
Once our yummy blue cake is all baked and ready to be served, then this is the way to do it. I'm quietly hoping that the sculpt will survive the demolding process, just in case I made an oopsie and we have to cast a new one. After cleaning the mold with alcohol, it's time to cast the first version of the skull. This resin definitely 100% cures into a solid white hard surface, which will be perfect for sculpting the face on top of. Now all I have to do is sit and wait for the resin to turn white, which will absolutely, no doubt, happen any moment now. Okay, so again, it turns out someone is an idiot and have ordered the wrong resin.
Fool of a took.
While I won't be able to use this one for sculpting on, it is a pretty good test for how the transparent skull will end up looking. We still do need a solid skull for sculpting on though, so I'm going to bring back out my loyal tub of plaster. I'll mix the powder with water until our stone milk is skimmed enough to capture all the minute details that no one will see once the skull is inside the face meat, then brush and pour the rest into the mold. If you're enjoying watching me slowly go insane trying to build a ghost from the inside out, or if you want to see more Lord of the Rings videos on the channel, please consider leaving a like and a comment to let me know. Thanks for hanging out, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. After a good night's cure, the skull is ready for demolding and comes out looking pretty okay if I may say so myself. I need to glue the skull to the easel board, but I'm trying to keep it to just a few dabs, so I'll be able to take it back off later and use as the positive part of my rigid face mold. I've never really sculpted from an underlying skull before, and it is feeling kind of weird and scary to have the proportions of the face already set before starting to build it up. The face will have to match with the skull when we do the light up effect, so if it ends up making the face look super wonky, there's not really much I can do about it. After giving our friend an isopropyl alcohol face wash like we all do every evening for our youthful smooth skin, I'll sculpt through a piece of cling film to help make wrinkles and lines look more natural. Lastly, among the myriad things I've copied from Adam at the north of the border, I'm using this nitrile glove to add some final skin detail as they come pre-installed with a pretty good nubbly texture. The face is now as good as my unskilled hands are able to make it, so it's time to get it molded. I'll grab this tin of Vaseline that I keep next to my computer for completely normal reasons, and rub it on the exposed skull keys and the baseboard to make sure the new plaster doesn't stick to them as it cures. I'll mix up another batch of grey soup and start dribbling it lovingly onto Buddy's face. I'm letting it cure and thicken a bit between each layer, both to make sure I don't accidentally ruin the detail coat, but also to make sure it's easier to build up without gravity ruining the fun. I'll let it cure overnight, then it should be ready to cast our face meat into.
1 day later.
The plaster is fully cured, and after quickly shaving down these razor sharp edges so that I don't accidentally hurt my delicate little fingies, I can just pop it off of the baseboard and start the opening process. Now this is the scariest part, as this time I'll have to dig out the clay and completely destroy the sculpture in the process. Meaning that if the mold is bad, well, I'll just see you guys next time. Please like and subscribe. God. This is when my sorely lacking mold making abilities really shine, as it literally took me 30 minutes to get this thing open without breaking it. As you can see, the sculpt is now basically destroyed. Now, I was going to use the leftovers to make a Robocop joke, but then I realized that if I remove the nose, that allows me access to a more current and algorithm-friendly reference.
Bucket of drugs.
As a silent tear runs down my face, I dig out all of the elf meat using wooden tools to make sure I don't scratch or otherwise damage the mold. At least the plaster skull is still intact, and I only need to glue one of the key nubs back on. Now all I need to do is give it a good alcohol cleanup and we can start prepping the mold for silicone. First step is gluing the keys back on, but only after first gluing them to myself a couple of times first. I've glued together a couple of balsa wood sticks as well that I can then attach to the back of the plaster skull to keep the whole thing from just sinking into the face during casting. To make the silicone elf flesh look more fleshy, I want to give it a slight tint of color with this pale flesh pigment. Buddy, however, has been in the water for a few minutes, so to make his skin a little less lively, I'll just add a pinch of blue to make it a little cooler. Like lembas bread, a little goes a long way when it comes to these pigments. If you go full Hobbit and toss in the whole thing, the silicone will quickly get too opaque to let any light through. I thought I was going to have an okay amount of time to get the silicone into the mold, but already after my initial brush coat, turns out it has gotten almost to bubblegum thickness. Now panic number 17 of this project starts setting in, and I'm watching my expensive silicone quickly get unusably thick as I frantically try to get it all into the mold. As I waste enough expensive silicone to guarantee I won't be able to send my dog to college, there isn't really much else I can do other than strap it down and let it do its thing, then just hope the inside isn't just one giant air bubble. My distressed silicone mess has now cured overnight. Once again, my astonishing lack of mold making skills come back to haunt me, and it seriously took me half an hour and basically any tool I could jam in there to get the thing open. When I finally managed to pop it out though, I have to say it does look pretty cool. Unfortunately, the brute force I had to apply to get it out of its poorly constructed plaster prison ended up tearing the silicone in several places, so I'm just going to have to make another cast.
Again.
This time I worked a lot faster, and even though it's still set up super fast, it was a lot easier to get out of the mold, so as long as I don't get any terrible air bubbles, I'm hoping that... Really? A sad-faced tear bubble? Mother... While what better be the last face cast cures,
It's been trained to expect pain when it hears the noise.
I want to get the final skull cast done and over with. This time I'm adding a bit of green tint to make the skull green. This will hopefully make the light shining through it more intensely green like the original shot from the movie, as well as maybe help with shadowing a bit more in the thicker areas. As soon as I've shoved as much beard as I can fit into my respirator mask, I can mix the resin and pour it into the skull mold. What was extra fun this time was how the resin got super hot while curing, to the point where little tendrils of smoke started coming off of it. I didn't try inhaling them, but I'm sure it would have been a great time. While all of the chemicals are curing and definitely filling my office with fumes any boy needs to grow big and strong, I'm using one of the failed face casts as reference as I start bulking out Buddy's torso using aluminum foil and Cosclay. I cut out a bunch of these clay strips for the braided chest armor, then using the old cling film trick again to add some seam lines to each strap. The idea of manually etching in a cloth texture for the chest surface is making me wish I had huffed those fumes earlier, but luckily through the tears I noticed that my new set of work gloves has this cloth part with a perfectly sized cloth pattern. I just need to line it up, give it a gentle rub, and voila! Not great. The leather straps aren't looking especially leathery, but by crumpling up a bit of tinfoil, I'll basically get a texture stamp that leaves a pretty decent cracked leather texture. I can then just pick out some of the new cracks and accentuate them with a sculpting tool for a bit of battle damage.
Take that! Just a dent!
This is a big knife I stole from the kitchen.
And this is a cake.
Well, I guess anything is a cake if you're brave enough, but regardless of this thing's cakeness, I accidentally cut it way too narrow, meaning there won't be any room for water. I had luckily kept the cutoffs, so I'll try my best to slice back in a bit of each side. The fixing and blending back in was extremely boring, so allow me to recreate the process using cutting-edge high-end CGI. After plugging up the ends to keep Buddy's metallic guts from falling out, all we need is just a bit of blending and re-leathering and the torso is ready for the oven. As soon as Buddy is baked, I'll base coat everything in a black acrylic paint before mixing up a slightly greenish brown for the leather straps. For a little bit of breakup, I just mixed a lighter version of the brown color and stippled it on using a torn up makeup sponge. As soon as that is dry, I can go over the straps with a darker brown wash. This thin paint will flow into all the cracks and crevices, and I can just use a paper towel to dab off any excess mess. I can then use one of my fancy thin brushes and hit the edges with a lighter beige-ish color for that classic worn leather edgewear. While all of that was going on, our castings have had time to fully cure and are ready for the molding. Even though it still seems to tear a bit under the right eyebrow, I have to say this one is looking pretty good, and making another one would mean the end of either me or my wallet, so this one will have to do. The green resin skull is also done. Now it looks okay, my only worry is that once inside the silicone, we won't be able to make out any of these shapes. To hopefully help with that, I tried covering some of the more skullish shapes with a dark wash. I'm not sure how much effect it's going to actually have in the end, but hey, at least I tried.
And trying is half the battle.
Hello and welcome to this reenactment of 1997 hit movie Face Off. While having the plaster skull in there does look cool, we do need to swap it out for our translucent green skull to be able to shine a light through it to hopefully be able to see the skull inside the silicone face when we activate ghost mode. I'll shove the new skull back into the empty face cavity and make sure all the bits are in the right place, and the head is now ready for painting. Nothing sticks to silicone except for more silicone, so to make a paint that'll work, I'll start off with mixing the same silicone we used for the face in this little container that I promise is totally new and unused, then thinning it down with a ton of naphtha. This stuff gives off some serious fumes that'll rot your brain, so unless you know how to specifically target the part of your gray matter that contains the sad parts of Land Before Time, do work in a well-ventilated space. First layer is a paler version of the base skin color that I'll be flicking on with my paintbrush in an attempt to get an organic looking spattering pattern. Next color is blue, which I also dab a bit of around the eyes and nostrils, followed by a layer of green. This was an attempt to mix a deep purple color for the corners of the eyes and some of the other deeper crevices, but it ended up being way dark and didn't really do more than add some shadowing. This is when I started to feel a sense of dread creeping in, which turned into a full sprint right at me when I started adding this yellow color, effectively turning Buddy into a glow stick. The last layer of burnt umber isn't making things any better, and as a terrifying image of me having to restart the process starts flashing in front of my eyes, I'm desperately trying to tone down my mistakes with a final layer of skin color. When that isn't fixing it either, I'm going to solve it the way I usually do. Wipe the tears away with alcohol, add some shading, and tell myself no one will notice.
Don't think I haven't noticed.
For my baseboard, I'm going to be using a sheet of acrylic so that I can mount an LED light underneath. To make sure the model won't just float to the top of the wet epoxy, I'm gluing it all directly to the baseboard. The first little LED panel I bought turned out to be way smaller than I expected. So in my so far very successful pursuit of making sure these videos cost more to make than they earn, I've ordered another slightly bigger panel. This one isn't big enough to cover the whole thing either, but if I build up a little space between the board and the light, it should hopefully do the trick. These cheap stir sticks from my downstairs paint store should be about the right width to work as spacers. I'm adding these extra little bits of balsa wood to give the glue a bit more surface to stick to before attaching it to the bottom of the acrylic. To be able to see what's going on in there when I'm casting the epoxy, I'm building the mold walls by supergluing together more leftover bits of acrylic, making sure God, you're an idiot. Resin famously hates us all and will escape through any microscopic opening it can find just to make the world a worse place to live in. I'll fill in any joint and opening I can find, then using a moist finger to get the silicone really good in there. We've now come to the scariest part of the process. Not only is there a lot of things that can go wrong when casting epoxy, there's also the combo of both not knowing if it will even actually look good in the end, but also the fact that if I f this up, I'd basically have to redo half the project. This first pour is going to be a thin layer designed to show me where the inevitable leaks are, as well as maybe fill in some of said holes before we add a mortgage down payment amount of epoxy.
72 hours later.
For the next layer, I want to add some darker swirls, so when the main pour has thickened slightly, I have another darker green batch, also getting a little, oh god, that is way too thick. Maybe I can still kind of swirl it into the... Oh, no, yeah, that's just trapping a million air bubbles. Okay, maybe if I just leave it, the bubbles will rise up and it'll all be fine. So, things are looking pretty bad right now, but I'm hoping I'll be able to mostly cover it up by adding more layers of resin on top, waiting for it to thicken a bit, and then add some darker swirly patterns to cover my sins. But I apparently did not wait long enough, so overnight it has all just blended together and made the whole layer darker. Now, I know you might be thinking that,
Hey, that water looks way too green.
And first of all, that is rude and extremely hurtful. How dare you? And second, yeah, it sure does, which is exactly why God invented color correction in post. As I keep adding more layers of decreasing level of tint, I try to pop whatever bubbles come up to the surface using fire technology until we have Buddy adequately submerged. And now we wait as the last layer of epoxy cures. The final layer is cured and, I mean, it does look kinda cool, right? I did the same demolding process on the last rings project and I apparently learned nothing. Someone in the comments on that video very helpfully told me that I could get around the issue with the acrylic being brittle by just hitting it with a heat gun for a few seconds, but I don't have one of those. I tried using a lighter instead, but that just made my office smell like melted G.I. Joes.
Sure was toasty.
I end up having to delve too greedily and too deep with a hammer and screwdriver, resulting in not only a ton of chip marks that'll have to be sanded out, but also shoots tiny shards of plastic all over my office that I'll have the pleasure of having poke into my feet for the next month, which according to Google is not great for my immediate life expectancy. With my cube of elven corpse water freed from the plastic that held it, I can start the cleanup process. First, the edges need to be flattened out using an X-Acto knife before I can get started on sanding. After just a few minutes of sanding, your desk will be covered in lung cancer, so all you kids out there, make sure you wear a dust mask when doing this. After cleaning off all the leftover resin dust with alcohol, I'll mix up a small batch of resin and carefully cover the surface with it. This will bind to the sanded surface and create an optical bond, making it so that we can once again see our friend inside the ice cube without having to do a ton of high grit sanding and polishing.
5 billion years later.
The top coat is finally cured and I'm pretty happy with the result. However, the recurring theme for this project of me not thinking things through properly is still very much in effect, and the resin that ran over the sides has bonded to the baseboard. My heart skipped a beat when I noticed I was getting air pockets on the face, meaning the bottom acrylic sheet is beginning to delaminate from the resin, taking the silicone with it. But I do have to get it off the board, so I'll just have to keep carefully trying to pry it loose. An hour later, our cube is free and my blood pressure is permanently heightened. You can see here that the acrylic sheet straight up broke off in several places. Now all I can do is try and squeeze the silicone back into place as good as I can and try to get all of this board fluff off of here. After an hour of scraping, gluing and sanding, we're ready for the final stretch of the project. To get a more interesting illusion of depth at the bottom of the water, I want to try adding some more swirly patterns. I'll paint a bunch of these swirls with different dark green and brown paints, some pretty opaque and some more transparent to let more of the light through. For our base, I've just glued together a bunch of my trusty paint stir sticks cut to length, painted it black and stippled on a little greenish paint for breakup using a makeup sponge. Now, if my measurements are correct for once, I should be able to just drop the resin cube into the frame, plop the LED panel underneath, and we are finally ready to show what we've done. If you're still watching at this point, thank you so much for sticking with me. If you got bored and skipped straight here, then that is also fine. I still love you. If you did enjoy the video and want to see more, do leave a like and a comment, as it does help a lot in getting our malevolent robot overlord to show this to more people, meaning I can dedicate more time to doing these. Until next time, make a mess and build cool stuff.